Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Black History Month program, Black Mental Health Matters. I'm April Allen. I keep saying Brazel, which is my maiden name, and my gender pronouns are she and her. I'm the System Director of the Center of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access here at PeaceHealth. This month, we're excited to celebrate Black history and future too. Historically, we've used this time to acknowledge the achievements and contributions of the Black community to our country and our culture. But we also take this time to educate, highlight, and discuss the needs of our community. At the core of some of those needs is access to mental health care and wellness. Today, I'm joined by an incredible group of leaders who will help me drive this conversation and share insights on how we can normalize this topic and advocate for access to care and resources that are equitable. My co-host is the fabulous Denise Gideon, System VP of Operations and Program Integration and Implementation. She's busy, and executive sponsor of our Caregiver Affinity Group BANG, which is our Black Allies Network group here at PeaceHealth. But before we jump in with Denise, I want to take time and do a reflection. If you want the human cooperation of humans, or if you want the cooperation of humans around you, you must make them feel they are important. And you do that by being genuine and humble. And I think this leads perfectly into welcoming Denise in our discussion. And we have another reflection that I'm going to jump into. Go ahead, two for Black History Month. You must never be fearful about what you're doing when it's right. Rosa Parks. And I think this leads perfectly into the conversation we're having today. So let me welcome Denise.
Thank you for the warm welcome, April. I am excited to join the conversation today. Our BANG family has been working around the clock to ensure this Black History Month is both celebratory and educational for our members and community-wide allies. That's why I'm so excited to kick off this conversation with our incredible speakers. Dr. Allison Briscoe-Smith, clinical psychologist, professor, and the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the Wright Institute. Dr. Briscoe-Smith provides training and consultation to Bay Area nonprofits and schools on how to support trauma-informed practices and cultural accountability. Next, we have mental health advocate, TED Talk speaker, and New York Times creative director, Joél Leon, whose work has been featured in the Columbia Journal, BBC News, Forbes, and the Huffington Post. And finally, trailblazing for the state of Oregon, we have Representative Janelle Bynum, a champion of underserved communities in East Multnomah and Clackamas counties. Representative Bynum led the call to Oregon's Governor Kate Brown, urging the state to increase mental health resources for communities of colors and establish a COVID-19 mental health relief fund. Thank you all for all your hard work and for joining us today.
Yay. Okay, thank you, Denise. Okay, let's get started. If y'all know me, to know me is to know I love good conversation. So I'm asking this question, hoping we get some good conversation going. Let's start with this. How has the topic of Black mental health shaped you and the work you do today? And I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work when you answer this question. So this is for all of y'all. Why don't you start, Dr. Briscoe-Smith?
Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here and to be in this space with you all. And I'm waving to all the folks out there. I really appreciate this question. And it kind of was a question that kind of takes me off guard a little bit. I'm like, let me think about it. And the way that I have to think about it is basically my entire life has been organized around seeking mental wellness for myself, for my family, and my community. And that's something that was really driven to me by my parents. Actually, the short story is I really wanted to be a marine biologist. I grew up in Hawaii and the Caribbean, and I was really interested in being a marine biologist. And my father, who was a doctor, said, "What you gonna do for people?" And I had to think about that. And basically, he and my other community members, I'm sure I could have been a great marine biologist too, but it was something that kind of set me on a path. And I've been working with kids pretty much since I was a kid myself. And just, it's a place where I spend the bulk of my time trying to make sure that my community is well. So that's, it's been my animating force. So I'm happy to be doing it and happy to be here with you all to learn about it as well.
Thank you. And I'll ask that same question to Joél and Representative Bynum. So go ahead, Joél. I'll let you go. I'm going to go in the order I'm showing on my screen.
Again, just want to echo what I said before we jumped on the call. A pleasure and honor to be sharing space with some phenomenal Black women and human beings. So I think a lot of my work, I mean, honestly, not wanting to steal an answer from Dr. Briscoe-Smith, but like my mother is from the Caribbean as well. So shout out Dominica specifically. And my dad, born and raised country boy from Pensacola, Florida. My father was a decorated Vietnam veteran who also suffered from a host of other issues related and unrelated to Vietnam. So PTSD, bouts of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. And so that coupled with, I actually spent time working in the nonprofit and social services sector for about several years before I made the transition into the marketing advertising space, if you will. But all of that has always been in support of my art, utilizing art in order to create community and also support community. And I myself, who has struggled with his own mental health issues, suicidal ideations, and of such, I've found it to be imperative to try to create brave spaces for folks to feel safe enough to hold these kinds of conversations, leading conversations when I'm asked to, but then also trying to ensure that the foundation is there for folks to feel like they can also too share in the vulnerable spaces, especially with regards to mental health and how we talk about it, the access to the language, the access to care, and trying to utilize my platform as a cis hetero Black man in order to do that in both big and small ways.
Awesome. And then I'll let Rep Bynum go, and I'll let out a secret. I'm going to tell them we're friends, so I'm used to calling you Janelle, Rep Bynum, but go ahead.
No, that's fine. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am so delighted to be here. And I must say, we are right in the middle of voting. And so I'm in the back of the chamber in a little phone booth. So I may pop off the screen momentarily to go take a vote. So not trying to be rude, but just respecting the process that we're in. So for me, I would say there's kind of a two-pronged level of attack for me in terms of mental health. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and of course now live here right outside of Portland. And I always grew up in very Black affirming spaces. And so it was only when I went to high school, I went to a girls' boarding school because the city had become so violent. That was when I realized I was like a minority. And that was totally mind-blowing, I would say. And ever since then, I went to a historically Black college. And so I was thrust back into this affirming space. And then I went into the work world and to graduate school. And all of a sudden things shifted again. And so I would say in my adulthood now in a broader world, it really has been about creating safe and affirming spaces for people coming by me so that they know they're not crazy when they experience certain things. But also making sure that they know that they can do it. The second thing is I have a family that suffers from mental health challenges, and they believe, many of them believe that was from some of the pesticides that were used in the harvesting of tobacco. And so I'm a real advocate for environmental policies as well as Black people just talking about what mental health looks like in our families. So I'll stop there because I have to vote, and I'll join you in a minute.
Thank you, Rep Bynum.
Thank you. And so, well, then my question then will be for Dr. Briscoe-Smith and for Joél then. So what is the state of Black mental health today, and what issues are we facing?
Sure. So I think for us to begin with the idea about the state of Black mental health, the first thing I would like for us to pause and do is for all Black folks in the space just to think to themselves, how we doing? That we can jump to the research and what's already out there, but the answer to this question starts with ourselves. How are we doing? How are we getting along? How are we feeling? How are we feeling in our bodies? How are our people doing? And that's the place that I'd like for us to orient first. And then we can move from that and say like, it's been rough. We have been posed with some additional challenges that haven't been held since my, grandmother and great grandmother's kind of experience, and challenges that are similar in terms of continued racialized violence. And the particular nuance and ways that this pandemic has impacted us has been by altering and severing the things that we often do, like coming together in community and being in sanctuary and being together, eating together, seeing each other. So there have been some challenges to our means of survival. The things that we have cultivated for generations and generations have been altered. And then we can think about the creativity and wisdom of our people and the ways in which we're figuring it out. So I always go back and forth. So do I have some bad news? Yeah. The rates of anxiety and depression are skyrocketing. Our youth are suffering under incredible weights of system failures. And our rates of substance use, our rates of challenges are really high. And we have a long-standing history of making ways out of no way, and would like to invite us to kind of think about and pay attention to what is the creativity that we have used in this moment, what are our opportunities for continued growth, and how are we doing? And if we ask ourselves the question, how are we doing, then I think we have opportunities for us to be well. So that's my hope. And again, in short, any statistic we can find, we know isn't that great. And it's been tough. And the barriers that I'm sure we're going to talk about, there've been a number of barriers that have been extraordinary to our seeking out of kind of connection, and some creativity that has helped us to overwhelm and to create new opportunities for getting help. So that would be my summary about it. But let's ask ourselves, how are we doing?
Joél?
Yeah, I love that. I think, and kind of expanding on that, I think what I've been working through and what I've been trying to help community sift through is recognizing, and pardon me, y'all, because I am in Brooklyn and it is a little loud outside, and my 2-year-old is now awake, so it's gonna hope for the best here.
This is reality, Joél. Go ahead.
The joy of remote.
But I think part of what I'm noticing too is like more folks trying to adopt and understand the language surrounding mental health, and then with that access to the language, and like a lot of the work that I've been doing is trying to bring folks into the moment. And I think Dr. Briscoe-Smith talked so eloquently about like the somatic experience, right? Like I think we're starting to see more young folks having a better understanding of what a stable mental health lifestyle looks like for them, and also the opposite end of that. And I think part of that gets to be looking at the totality of our experience and holding space for both, right? I think both the joy and the pain, and not to get too Frankie Beverly and Maze, but like, sunshine, rain, right? Like in a very simple level, what we're talking about is duality. And I think the state of mental health today for me is very much about the duality of our existence, and then also being able to be really cognizant of the intersectionality of our experiences and how that affects our mental health, right? Me as a cis hetero Black man, my experience is completely different than someone who maybe is living with a disability, or is a Black femme or Black woman facing. And so my job, and I think all of our job collectively as a community, is to be able to hold space for all of our collective experiences, right? And so knowing that even in the midst of a pandemic, I think we get to sit with what is both joyful and what is also difficult. And I think that's what I'm starting to see more discourse around, and hopefully I'm hoping to see a lot more, because that kind of tension doesn't really go away. I think it's existed before I was here, before any of us were here, and will be here long after we're gone. I think that level of equanimity that we're all kind of seeking also allows us to recognize that our mental health is centered around both spaces having equal shared existence, right? Like I can be joyful and it can be hurt, but also recognize that there's love here and there's also some pain here. And how do I give myself the opportunity to exist in all of these spaces without judgment? And I think to me that feels like a rallying cry for the community and something that I'm hoping we can all adopt more of as a principle moving forward.
Thank you.
I love
Senator
that.
Bynum, I don't know. Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
I just gave you, so I'm sorry too. Go ahead.
No, I
April.
was just gonna say, I love what he just said about the duality of humanness. I'm a professor, so I teach a lot about the duality of humanness as well. And, you know, that's something that I always try to get my students to wrap their minds around, right? There's not always an either or. There's an and, right? And that's how we exist as humans. And I think sometimes in our communities, being Black, everybody know I'm Black here, that there's sometimes this hesitancy to acknowledge both, historically speaking. And so I am like, and I mean, I'm just thinking about conversations with my mother, my beloved mother. And it's like, well, can I be, stressed out and happy about my success, right? Can I do both? And sometimes we don't allow for both, right? And I think we've all had that experience in our community where it's like, but you're doing well, or you're getting a good paycheck, or you're this and that, and you're going, but also you're not seeing the other side of that. You're not seeing the stress when you're the only person there. You're not seeing the stress of the microaggression, right? And everybody looking at you. Excuse my colloquialism, everybody, today I'm with family, but everyone's looking at you like you're crazy, you're going, but that was offensive. Well, you're overreacting, or they didn't mean it that way. And you're saying, but that just cut. And so I just appreciate what you said, that duality that does exist, and that we should be comfortable with that duality. I can be grateful and I can still feel grief, so. Right. Anyways, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go preach, Denise. That just struck a chord in my soul, as they say in church. That hit me in my soul. So I just wanted to say that. And go ahead. I know you were going to ask Rep. Bynum a question, but I will be quiet now.
I know, my apologies. I misspoke and called you senator, so maybe I'm speaking something into existence, right? Representative Bynum. So I don't know.
Part of our conversation.
And so I don't know if you had heard the question when I had asked what the state of Black mental health today was, or if you had any comments.
Sure. So one of the things that I've taken on as a personal mission is giving Black people the permission to experience joy and claim that. And I discovered this need because I went through counseling through COVID. Is my staff recommended. He said, you're taking in a lot of people's trauma, and you probably need a release yourself. So I started seeing a counselor, and they asked me what were the things that I enjoyed. And I was like, what do you mean? And it just became very clear to me that I needed to be clear about giving myself permission to experience joy. So as the mother of 4 children, I became this fierce advocate for seeing my children experience joy, and then seeing their friends and other Oregon children experience the pureness of Black joy. Like, we talk about Black excellence, but we don't talk about joy. And so whether it is laughing, whether it is playing sports, all of those things that help us be healthy, that is, that's what I really think the state of Black mental health looks like today. Okay, is really defining those spaces where we can be happy without apology.
Thank you. Okay, so Dr. Briscoe-Smith, last month we had a great chat with Dr. Moreland Kapua, who helped us unpack the concept of trauma-informed care. The chat was super informative, and I'd be curious to continue learning from you about trauma and specifically the role it plays in the state of mental health within our communities today.
Sure. Well, let me first say you should all call me Allison. I let that slide. Dr. Briscoe is my father, so call me Allison. And I've had the blessing to work with Denise for a long time now. And so when I think about trauma and what trauma is, I think about it this way. I think we all respond to stress. Stress shows up and we actually need a little bit of stress sometimes, a little bit to get up and get going, the stress of maybe getting deeply engaged in a piece of work, the stress of loving on our family in a particular way. So stress in of itself is not a bad thing. And I think that's actually the way that we want to kind of start off. Sometimes we have phrased or framed it as if stress in of itself is inherently bad. Trauma to me is when stress becomes way too high or way too long. So we can think about it being acute, so a big moment of stress, or when something that is a low level stress goes on for way too long. So those are two ways that we can kind of think about it, but we can also frame and think about something like racial trauma is a stressor that is high and prolonged. We can think about multiple generations of stress that has come to us due to, the ways in which our skin color is held or not, the ways in which our system has been organized to ensure that we are stressed. And that has been going on at high levels and for a long time. And that when we see, again, moments of stress, when we see our brothers, our sisters, our cousins being harmed, that's our family, and we respond as if that's our threat to ourselves. Acute, and it's prolonged because there has been multiple, right? And so that's when we see it of ourselves, that's when we experience. So this is a way of thinking about the cumulative, the synergistic ways in which these experiences add up. And as Joél kind of mentioned, the ways in which that shows up in our bodies, the ways in which our stress gets carried and handed down. How many of our, family members got the cholesterol, got the sugar, got the stress, we have it showed up in particular ways, right? And it also shows up in terms of our health. How are we doing it? We have multiple generations of folks have been finding ways of coping. And some of those copings are about our joy and our creativity. And some of those copings are about the things that are readily available to us, like substances, like the things that are readily available to us, like anger turned inwards, the things that are readily available to us, like shame. So our opportunity in terms of thinking about kind of mental health is that if we, just like Rep. Bynum is speaking about, can focus on our joy and actually have systems in place that value our joy, value our smile, value that. So I don't want to just internalize this into some sort of failing, because that is not what it is. But we have had systems that are organized and capitalizing off of our blood, sweat, and tears and around our own struggles. So that's how I think about what trauma is, and broadening the definition of trauma without getting too relativistic. Like, I don't think everything's a trauma. And I do think that if we talk about extraordinary stress that's high and that's prolonged, we might be able to find ourselves in that place. And especially if that joy, especially if that stress is absent of joy, I can work really, really hard and have joy in my work, and that feels different than being tasked to work without a space for a joy. So I think Rep. Bynum has really landed on something that is a pathway to our healing and a valuing of our health. And I know that one joy I'm experiencing is your beautiful little girl who you have let join us. So thank you for sharing her, because I think the more chance we get to see our beautiful children and their big bright eyes, the better. So I appreciate it.
I agree.
I have no choice. There's no choice. Not because, yes, I do love my daughter. This is, but
No.
I didn't have no choice. And I was like, oh yeah. She was like, no, she just invites herself everywhere.
She said, I am here, Joél. She said, I am here. And that's what she needs to do it too. And I will say, I have a 6 and a 9-year-old at home, and 6-year-old still shows up like, I am here. I don't care if you're in a meeting, mommy, you need to give me a hug. I need a kiss. I need affection. And sometimes that makes my joy meter go right up all the time when she shows up, right? Because you're looking at those eyes, and you're looking at, for me, why I do the work I do as well. It's for those coming after me, which are my children, right? So anyways, thank you. And I did, look, Dr. or Allison, since you said we could let go of Briscoe-Smith, I wrote down extraordinary stress too high, or low level stress too long. And I think that is perfectly stated. And that is perfectly stated. Well, I have a question for Rep. Bynum. And I was thinking about how you said you were creating joy for your children, Rep Bynum, or Janelle, as I would call you. And I would say we definitely create joy for each other. We sit on the call, you know, you'll call me, say, okay, it's almost like, tell me something good. It's like Shaka Khan, tell me something good, you know. And so we have a good relationship where we laugh a lot, and we make each other laugh. So I just want to point that out. Thank you as well for sharing your joy journey. So I have a question for you though. So you wrote a letter to Oregon Governor Kate Brown, and in it you mentioned communities of color needing viable options for healing. Can you share with us the current barriers that the Black community faces to access adequate mental health care?
Yeah, so I'm happy to report that we've made a lot of progress in this arena. The letter that I shared with Governor Brown was basically about, can we extend the number of people who are able to provide care to us? So we knew we had a shortage of providers who were culturally competent, with whom, when you go and you sit down for the session, you're not explaining things like, let's say you use the expression, well, my daddy's not a glassmaker, something like that. You don't have to explain that. So we knew we had a shortage of people like that. We knew we had interns that could see patients, but they couldn't bill. And so we also had to deal with the finances of providing care. And then we also needed to talk about what the barriers were structurally to people even becoming licensed. We're still fighting that battle, but Oregon has some of the highest licensure requirements anywhere around. And I am not understanding how we can't balance that with the need for people to be seen. So that was the gist of the letter. And oh, by the way, we need some money for it. And we were able to get $84 million passed in a package. And we're still having conversations about the number of healthcare provider or mental health providers we are licensing and producing in the state, which is still inadequate to meet our needs.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you taking on that fight. I will just say Rep Bynum has been fighting a lot over the last, 2 years, year and a half, where I want to brag on you, but I don't want to hijack the conversation, but she has been doing a lot for communities of color, and particularly Black communities around a host of issues that I won't start naming. But one of the things that she did help get passed was the Crown Act here in Oregon. And so I'm really appreciative of that work you're doing, Rep Bynum.
Well, if I can make a quick comment.
Mm-hmm.
So the Crown Act, for those of you who don't know, supports people in the workplace and at school and in athletics, because remember I mentioned joy. It supports people being able to wear their hair naturally. It also supports them in spaces where the way we adorn our hair, which is culturally relevant, so with beads or clips or colors, isn't shamed out of our children, for instance. So we're not having kids who are playing volleyball cutting their beads out of their hair. Right. So that is really in support of Black mental health and Black physical health, which is, related, of course, to our mental health. And so I'm really happy that April actually was able to help on that legislation as well. So super cool to have our kids wear their hair naturally to school without shame.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, thank you. We're all enjoying the privilege, and as I look in the room, I see the beauty and the diversity of the various hairstyles represented, and just know that tomorrow we all could look totally different. So, Joél, I have a question for you. So I enjoyed your recent article in the New York Times and made note of the statement you made about racism and internalized masculinity norms can reduce Black men's willingness to seek help. We must break our silence and begin the process of opening ourselves up to one another What are some of your ideas on how we can help normalize this topic within our own community?
Well, I think a lot of this, and thank you for that question, Denise. I think a lot of this is really getting away from the elitism surrounding the conversations. I think part of my struggle and part of the struggle I've had as a writer, as an essayist, as a poet, even as a father, it's been the kind of limited scope of how we generally have these conversations. It's generally, I think, honestly, us talking in circles. It's like the folks who already know what is needed, what the work requires, as opposed to the folks like, I'm in Bed-Stuy right now. Like I mean, not for nothing, there's a trap house like right downstairs from us, and we've created a beautiful environment for our children. But like the folks who need to be at least privy to the conversation or have access to the conversation, generally not included in the conversation. And so I think a lot of the work for me has been how do we, and especially with, I'm not going to get into a conversation about how I feel about the relaxed mandates here in New York as far as COVID is concerned, but I will say the opening of the city allows for more community-based initiatives. And I think when I think of community-based initiatives, I think of the physicality. Like, we need each other. We need to see each other. We need to speak amongst each other. And there needs to be spaces, physical spaces, in order for that to happen. And so I think that's part and parcel of how we need to show up. It's like, how can we be doing more with regards to just opening space for folks to, and I think when I think about the duality, also being cognizant of how a person's lived experience is different than ours, and it might not line up with or to ours, but how are we giving space for the things that maybe sometimes are a little more charged? I think we've been having a lot of comfortable conversations with people who also are comforting. And I think a lot of this language and a lot of the unpacking of the language has to do with the folks who aren't on the same wavelength as us, because that's essentially where the tension is. And so some of that is like bringing that conversation to the front door. It doesn't have to be something super organized. It's just like talking to the young brothers and sisters or non-binary folks in the community about what's affecting them, what's affecting their mental health. Especially when I think about internalized masculinity, the conversation I was privy to be a part of for ABC News was so wonderful for me, because I sat next to Justice, who is a non-binary Black person, who really is doing the work with regards to helping us unpack that. And I think being able to sit alongside them in solidarity and having a conversation, especially from my background, where I come from, I'm from the Bronx, like 188th and Creston Avenue. For those that don't know that area, that's like a hotbed for a lot of other stuff that I won't get into. But a community that is still suffering and still looking for ways out. And a lot of that is due to white supremacy and the ways white supremacy has affected how we look at masculinity, and how the system of patriarchy is essentially keeping us from having complex, nuanced conversations about who we are and who we want to be. And I think lastly, I think part of that community conversation also gets to be, how are we questioning and being more curious about the things we've adopted as a truth, and how can we unpack that? Like, I've been told there are certain ways I'm supposed to show up as a man, as a father. How are we debunking binary gender norms and having bigger, more complex, broad conversations about what does the community need, and who are the most marginalized people in the community, and how do we create space for them to make sure we're addressing their needs first, especially as a privileged class of individuals. I'm a Black man, but I'm a man. So like, there's privilege there. How am I utilizing that privilege in a way that's uplifting those who don't have a voice or the platform?
We're hanging on every word, Joél. There's a pause. There's a pause.
Just wrote that for me, and then I just was like, all right, this is what you want me to say? All right, cool, I got it. Advance this.
We can tell that you will not be as scripted, and so which I personally appreciate, because I want an honest conversation. And so many times we don't like to have those uncomfortable conversations, but they don't lead to any change, any revelation, any real, interchange, so I appreciate honest conversation. I always tell people I rather know the truth than not know the truth at all, right? And then just putting it up and making me feel good, that's not going to help me move the needle. That's not going to help change happen. That's not going to help me love you better. So I appreciate that, Joél. I think I have the last question, and then we're going to take some questions and answer sessions. We'll have some questions from the audience, I'm sorry, and then we'll have some answers from our panelists who will be here to provide some good answers for y'all, hopefully. Okay, my last question is for all y'all. What can we do as an institution, community, and individuals to collectively shift the narrative around the stigma of this topic while holding our public sectors accountable to create more access and resources? Why don't we start with Rep. Bynum on this one?
Thanks for the question. I would say it begins internally. So the question to ask is, do your own employees feel that coming to work is an exercise in positive mental health? Are they stressed when they come into your own space? And if your own house is not in order, then there is no pathway to success for the organization to make a difference externally. So I've had workplaces where I've walked in and I felt, wow, this is amazing. I feel affirmed, even on the hard days. And then there are those, in some cases, the Capitol at times. There are some cases, some days where I feel like, no, this place does not affirm me as a Black woman, even though I have a significant amount of power here. And so I'm working to establish that here in the Capitol on behalf of all Oregonians, not just Black Oregonians.
Thank you. And I will go to Joél on this question as well, and then we'll end with Allison. And I can restate it just since I know you have your daughter there, Joél. What can we do as an institution, community, and individuals to collectively shift the narrative around the stigma of this topic while holding our public sectors accountable to create more access and resources?
I love that question. And I think Rep. Bynum answered it so well. Part of that work too, I think, is if we know our folks are going into spaces that are unsafe for them, how are we creating spaces within our own community to ensure that when Rep. Bynum leaves the Capitol, she's going into a space that's welcoming. And I think when I first heard her mention internally, I do think a lot about the internal resources. Like, we can't wait for anybody else to liberate us at this point. I think that's actually never been the case. When you look at all the work that we've done as a community collectively over the years, over the generations, it's been through force, and it's been essentially forcing the powers that be to recognize the plight and the struggle and to actually do something about it. But a lot of it is like, I'll try to keep this brief. When I think most about the Black Panther Party, what I think about is less about black leather jackets and bringing guns to the Capitol. I think about the free breakfast program. I think about, okay, this is what we need to do to create an institution to answer the questions that our government is not answering for us, right? And I think, for us, by us gets to be the rallying cry. Like, I think when we have folks in power, like Rep. Bynum, who are looking out for the better of our community, that also allows us to do the work. But I think we have to do the work first, and that's like, on a local level, yes. But again, how are we creating community in simple ways? Like, am I inviting people into my space? Am I creating space for very nuanced conversations that maybe make other people uncomfortable? And how are we challenging each other with love and intention? And I think the more we can lead with that and lead with a loving truth as opposed to brutal honesty, which I despise as language, I think the more we give ourselves the opportunity to show up in ways that's going to be affirming, and also allows for a deeper understanding of what mental health gets to look like for everybody, and not painting everybody with broad strokes in that conversation.
Yeah, no, I love that, Joél. Thank you for being honest. I think, one thing that our community's really been known for is creating community, right? Like, we are going to create community. So if you're in a situation and you don't see, and you see someone that looks like you, let's say that, let me go that way, then you're like, hey, we're going to acknowledge you. You know what I mean? I remember when I went to law school, and so how they did it is they put 2 of us in every class. I'm being very transparent. So, I happen to be our law school graduation speaker. And so one of the jokes was, you saw the one person, and every day you like, you giving the nod. You know, we give that nod, you know, and like, what's up? And so, and I've had people from other communities always say to me, I have Asian friends say it, I've had my white friends say it. They say, man, can I get in on the nod? You know, like, it makes me want to be a part of your community. And I always laugh about it, but it's just that acknowledgement of, I see you and you are beautiful. I see you, you are important. I see you. Don't try to be no one that you're not supposed to be. Be you, right? And so that nod means so much to us when we see that nod, you know? And so I just love what you're saying. And there's a term that I heard before and I think this is perfect also for Allison, since this is your field of psychiatry, is carefrontation. I heard this term recently in a racialized trauma segment that I did here at PeaceHealth. We have a Social and Health Justice Advisory Council, and so we brought in somebody who is an expert on racialized trauma and minoritization, which you can imagine it was heavy. Denise was there. It was heavy. It wasn't for the light at heart. It wasn't for the faint at heart. And so one term she would call out was, we have to be okay with being carefrontational. Carefrontational, because we think of conflict, right, or confronting as bad. But she said, no, you have to be able to confront people with love, right? Like I say, love and truth. That's always the balance. I'm trying to do love and truth. And so, but anyways, Dr. Briscoe-Smith, or Allison, as we have come to call you, go ahead and speak to that. Speak to, what can we do?
Yeah, I haven't heard that term before, but I'm definitely going to have to cite it and borrow it. And it feels so aligned with what we've been kind of talking about here. You know, I think with the question about like, what can we do as systems and individuals? And I want to borrow from what Joél kind of offered up here, is I think what we can and should do is tell the loving truth. And I think if we can start, number one, like, let me tell the truth about how I'm really doing. That's courageous and that's brave, and there's not a lot of social support for that. To be really honest about, like, anxiety kind of kicks my butt sometimes. My worries go, they spit out. Anxiety is something I'm always going to have to kind of manage. So let me speak to that. But then let's also move, and if we can do that, then perhaps we can create the nuance and the mosaic of our real lived experiences, not get trapped by singular stories, not get trapped by singular stories about what Black men are supposed to be like, not get trapped by a story about strong Black women. There's ways I want to be part of that, but also I'm sometimes trapped by that because it doesn't give us enough spaciousness for our joy and our heartache and our grief. So I think, one, we have to tell the truth, but then we have to have containers that are willing to listen to our truth and not be like, oh, but you're so strong. Oh, but you're so successful. Oh, but this is how men are supposed to be. Because we've all been met with, you know, telling the truth with some sort of constraint. So we have to have systems that are big enough to actually allow us to have the nuance and the diversity and the difference, so that we can have systems be able to tell the truth. That also goes, I think, to what Rep. Bynum is speaking about. Let's make sure that our systems are telling the truth too. If this is a good place for Black people to come and work, then we need to be honest about that. Right? And we've all lived and thrived in places that have, and all lived and thrived in places that haven't. So let's be honest, right? And I think sometimes our desire to do things the right way, or our incapability of engaging with our discomfort, means that we move away from being honest. Can we be honest and actually create multiple stories for us to be present in and have the spaciousness? That also means the spaciousness to have carefrontation. I think you should go lay down. I mean, I worked with Denise a while back, and I have to say the staff that I worked with had a carefrontation for me, and they said, your calendar is a mess. We're going to take it from you. We're going to organize your calendar. And then all of a sudden I start seeing this thing called DW show up on my calendar, my schedule. What is DW? Well, the woman who was helping me out made sure I got scheduled time to do desk work, a thing that I've never done for myself, right? So that was care, and that was care in broader kind of community. But, you know, I had to manage. I'm strong. I'm doing it on my own. I wasn't telling the truth, and people around me knew, and the people who know the best are our children. They know we're not telling it. So I think the opportunity that we have, the smallest thing that we can do, is to tell the truth and be able to receive other people's stories around it too.
I I love what you just said, telling the truth. One thing about me is, in the Black community, they say, tell the truth and shame the devil. That is, we've all heard that growing up. Tell the truth and shame the devil, right? And so I think one thing that is so important to me, and you do this work as well, DEI, or DEIB, as some people are starting to call it, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, is there's a level of vulnerability you have to bring in that work and say, this is my experience. And you have to be, I hate to say this, but sometimes I'll say that my job is going to be to bleed in front of you a bit. But with that bleeding, I have to get bandaged up. I have to have a therapist. I have to have joy sessions with Janelle or with Denise and say, this is what's really happening. I have to have cry sessions. I have to have my group where it's like, because I am taking in people's trauma. I'm taking in their experience, and sometimes they're not believed, right? And so I do appreciate, when we do share our stories, but I also know the tax that comes with that as well. So, make sure you have your community out there. Make sure you have folks that you can have joy with, a joy journey with. Make sure you have girlfriends and guy friends and non-binary friends, and that you can laugh and have joy with and be real with. Because one thing about me is, and I know Denise is the same way, anybody knows Denise is the truth, you want someone you can be real with. Because look, Denise, we became quick comrades in the sense of getting along really well, because she was honest, and you appreciate when somebody's like, this is the space you're in, this is some of the challenges you can expect, but I'm here with you. So I've always appreciated what she's brought to me. So anyways, with that being said, let's look at the chat and see if we have any questions that are popping up. And
We do.
Yeah, good.
We have questions. So, and I appreciate this first question. It came up during our dialogue. So the question is, what is Black joy? And what's the difference between just joy, and why the difference in calling it Black joy? So that's open to our entire panel.
I'll take a stab at it really quickly. It's that feeling. So internally for me, it's that permission to experience things that are good and not feel any guilt about it, and not wanting to hide that. And the reason that that's important is because even in this place, I find myself that if I'm laughing in a group of, I finally have Black colleagues, which I never really had before. If I'm in that group, I can laugh as loud as we normally laugh without being policed. It means that if my kid is running, I have a kid that's a football player. If he's the one running the ball down the line, I don't feel guilty that some other kid doesn't get that chance. Like, I want him to be able to run that ball and get the touchdown. That's kind of the nuanced twist of it. It's that permission for Black people to experience joy without the extra fear of terror that someone might intervene on that and try to steal your joy. Because, and I can't see all of the people out there, but I'm guessing some of you are not Black. Some people can't stand to see us happy, and they will do everything they can to interrupt that. It's just, I don't know if they're born with that, if that's just systemic, but some people just can't stand it. So that's, hopefully I provided some perspective on that.
Thank you. Anyone else on the panel?
I mean, I'll jump in really quickly. I think, and thank you. I think it was Lisa who asked the question. I think one thing I want to address is that what part of her question was, what makes it, let me not assume, part of what Lisa's question was, what makes it separate? And I actually don't think there is a separation. I think it's more and also. Black joy is not separate from joy. It's just living in conjunction with the joy you identify as, whatever joy looks like to you. But I do think, and I think Brett Bynum explained this so well. The Black joy allows us the opportunity to live in a space that recognizes our Blackness and our humanity in conjunction with each other, right? So that means I get to be joyful, but there's also there's an intersection that meets that. My Black experience is going to be different than yours because there's contextual history, there's nuance, even just in as far as community is concerned. Like Blackness is not a monolith. However, Black joy is something that allows all of us to share in spaces that mirror our experiences in a way that is different than the joy of just, hey, we're watching a show together. But like if we're watching Martin together, you know, like in like that context, the fact that I don't have to explain to the people on this call what Martin is telling, right? Like there are things that we share in our experience that it's not excluding others from being a part, but it's understanding that our experience comes with so much layered conditioning surrounding it that we get to enjoy and embrace it. So I think that the more important part for me is the separate part, because I want you to really understand that it's not separate. There's no separation here. It's how does our Blackness and our joy get to live in conjunction with each other? Like this is Black joy. She's Black. And we get to acknowledge that without it feeling like it's problematic, you know?
And feel free, Allison, if you have something to add there.
Just adding a and a well again.
We can't help it. I don't care if you are agnostic or atheist. You can't help it. You have that is part of our culture, is those church roots when you are part of the American diaspora anyways. And so you're like, yeah, no, Joél, I'm about to get me an organ out. No, exactly. No, I think, you know, and that question's actually hitting me. Black joy, right? I've never thought of the nuance, because we say Black joy, but you know, I think about some of the pictures, right? And when you see Black joy or hashtag Black joy on Instagram or social media, and a lot of time it's what you said, it's that it's existing, the duality in the existence of humanity and Blackness, and not being told it's wrong, right? So Black joy could be me coming out here with some big hoop earrings, some round the way girl earrings, right? And being like, I'm going to use a colloquial term, everybody, at PeaceHealth. I'm feeling myself, right? Like, I think I look good right now, and it may not be what everybody else is doing, but I know in my community, this is what is hot, right? So I think
let me jump in really quickly.
Yeah.
There's another nuance here, that when we hashtag Black joy, in some ways, it can be a symbol of defiance, right? So when we talk about Black joy, especially on social media, it is in direct defiance of people who do not want to see you happy. So for instance, I want to bring up the HBCU students right now who are being attacked with bomb threats.
Right.
And how do we as parents, as loving community members, fight back against people who are trying to terrorize our children from being educated and experiencing joy? So my way of fighting back was giving some of the students my TikTok account and letting them share like a day in the life. That is Black joy. That is defiance. That is saying that you have a right to experience your education joyfully. So
yeah. And no, I love that. I love that, Janelle or Rep. Bynum. Allison, did you have anything you wanted to add? Because I think this is a really great question someone asked. Yeah.
Well, I'm really just appreciating the kind of conversation, because I think it's actually what we really need is space for us as Black folks to define and to talk about it. I think there's both the ways in which we can have the nod and have the well and have the and have those automatic pieces, and also the invitation for us to try to recognize and see it within each other and to challenge it. I also really hear too, it's the joy that has to happen that is a defiance. It's like, you know, my kids were on the blacktop and they were loud and having a good time, and someone came over to police them. It's that, like the 7th graders, right? That they don't get a chance to laugh as loud, or, you know, the conversation I have to have with them as they're negotiating the mall, how they have to enter, where they have to, like, it's those kinds of pieces, the kind of constraints that we have to have that don't necessarily allow living in our loudest. The ways in which my kids play on the playground is different in terms of how much they get to laugh and take up space. So, you know, I think it's the idea and invitation that folks have provided here about that claiming of that space, and to have a reciprocal that can receive it, to know that when me and my girlfriends are kicking it and are really loud, we are not a threat. To not interpret and to read us as threat, and my children are not a threat, and our children are not a threat. But that's how, like, why is there a need to put the Black on top of the Black joy? Is because of these kinds of contexts. Nuance layers that Joél, I think, is and Rep Bynum are kind of speaking about. So all that to kind of say it's a need. But I'm also just feeling like right before the shutdown, we had a huge Black Joy parade in Oakland. And that was just the most fun. And what it felt like to be out and about and have my children dancing, and me rolling up in the parade, videotaping everything I wasn't supposed to, but that was the point, right? You know, it was just this kind of peace. And when you feel that, it's awesome.
Yeah.
I know we're pressed for time. We have 3 minutes left, but we have one more question from the audience. And that question is, what can we do as PeaceHealth co-workers to acknowledge and help with the struggles our people of color co-worker space?
I have a quick one, which is to listen and to believe them. To listen and believe. I think there are many barriers internally and external to believing what people are saying, but if you could just lean into the heat of the moment and to listen to that, what someone is telling to you about their experience might be true, just that would be my 1 second. Listen and believe them. That is a wonderful opportunity.
Piggybacking on what Allison said, because again, she is so brilliant. I think if you're going to be listening, also in order to do that, if you're wondering, how do I show up as an ally, especially from a white ally, it's utilizing privilege and removing ego. So ego is something we all have. Privilege is something we all have in some way, shape, or form. Again, I'm a Black man. I'm still a man. There are privileges I have. I'm fairer skinned, whatever. We can go down the litany. The idea, though, that I need to be able to remove my ego in order to listen to folks who are coming from conditions that are not like mine. And so I can't judge their experience based on what I've experienced, because we are different human beings with different experiences. And the more I can hold space for my colleagues, especially my Black women, Black femme, non-binary colleagues, again, we're looking at folks who are potentially, when we're looking at systems, most disadvantaged when it comes to resources, to how resources are allocated, how we're devoting time and energy into the work that they do. If I'm listening, and if I want to be an active listener, I have to remove my ego and defensiveness out of this space.
Thank you, Joél. And Janelle, do you have anything to add in the last few seconds?
Yes, I would say creating space, not assuming that all people of color are a ball full of struggle. We actually are a confluence of rivers of triumph. And, you know, potentially, instead of being fearful of that person, actually maybe trusting that they actually know something.
See, and that's why she's my friend. So we're gonna end there. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you to Allison and Denise, and I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to Denise too, but we both want to thank you, as well as Bang and with CIDA, Joél and Rep Bynum, for being here today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, sharing your wisdom, and sharing your hearts. We appreciate you, and I know I'm moved. I feel a little emotional because a lot of times I do separate myself out of the work, but to actually be able to bring myself fully into work, I do appreciate this opportunity. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful and joyful day.
Thank you.